Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Respected speakers and respected guests, good evening and Assalamu alaikum. May peace and blessings be upon you. Welcome to our Women's Interfaith Symposium organized by the Ahmadiyya Muslim Women's Association. The title of tonight's symposium is Religion, a Source of Peace or Conflict. It was the tradition of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, which was founded by Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, the promised Messiah and Mahdi, to hold events which inspired peaceful and conversation and perspective. The Ahmadiyya Muslim community is an international revival movement within Islam, having members in over 200 countries. The founder of the community, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, on whom be peace, the promised Messiah and Mahdi, declared that extremism and an aggressive jihad with the sword had no place in Islam. The best way to defend Islam is through an intellectual jihad with the pen. Through his life, he penned over 80 books and tens of thousands of letters, delivered hundreds of lectures, and engaged in scores of public debates. The motto of the community is, love for all, hatred for none. The community encourages interfaith dialogue, shares commonalities, and promotes information amongst the followers of different faiths. It has been holding many interfaith symposiums and conferences across Canada for the last 30 years. Such events offer a unique learning experience that offers delegates from diverse faith groups and communities and philosophical traditions a wonderful opportunity to exchange ideas and explore topical issues in a spirit of mutual respect. It is encouraging that distinguished scholars representing a multiplicity of faiths and beliefs come together in a spirit of brotherhood, or in this case, sisterhood. We support the value of interfaith interactions for enriching our awareness of the divine being in the world. We would like to start our proceedings this evening with a recitation of the Holy Quran in Arabic, followed by the English translation. For the recitation, I invite Sidrat al-Muntaha to please come and recite Surah Al-Nisa, verses 151 to 153. Assalamualaikum.
A'udzu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Innalladhina yakfuruna billahi wa rusulihi wa yuriduna an yufarriqu bainallahi wa rusulihi wa yaquluna nu'minu bi ba'dhin wa nakfur bi ba'dhin wa yuriduna an yattahizu baina dhalika sabila. Ulaika humul kafiruna haqqan wa'tadna lil kafirina azaban muhina. Wallazina amanu billahi wa rusulihi wa lam yufarriqu baina ahadin minhum أحد منهم أولئك سوف يؤتيهم أجورهم وكان الله غفورا رحيما. English translation. I seek refuge from Allah, from Satan the rejected, in the name of Allah, the gracious, ever merciful. Surely, those who believe in Allah and His messengers and seek to make a distinction between Allah and His messengers and say, we believe in some and disbelieve in others and seek to take away in between. These really are the disbelievers, and we have prepared for the disbelievers a humiliating punishment. And those who believe in Allah and in all His messengers and make no distinction between any of them, to such He will soon give their reward. And Allah is most forgiving, merciful. Thank you.
Thank you, Sidra. Moving forwards, I would like to introduce our moderator for this evening, Susan Rutherford. Susan Rutherford is a member of the Varsity Acres Presbyterian Church and volunteers with the Christian Education Committee, mission and outreach work, as well as being previously involved in the Board of Managers of the church. Susan has been an elementary school teacher since 1996 in both Calgary and Edmonton, and still loves that she gets to work with kids every day. She enjoys quilting and gardening in her spare time and enjoys traveling to new places and meeting new people. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Susan, for such a beautiful, brief introduction. And as my name is Lalita, and I hope I will try to provide some kind of justice to Hinduism, because this is a very strong topic, a source of peace, or religion, a source of peace or conflict. And like other religions, it has the same values in Hinduism too. So, I'm not sure I can see. Yeah. So as everyone knew, religion has a great role in influencing or shaping human behavior, and this force is bigger than the force of material world. We all know that. We all know that all laws and physical forces can come from one of the source, that's the religion. And if we properly direct that force, we can make better changes in the world. And examples are Gandhi and Martin Luther King. They conducted non-violence protest based on religion level. And when we go back to this research, which is better, so some philosophers, they say, religion is a source of peace. Most say like this, those who follow the religion. And they also argue for this. Under the right circumstances, religion or spiritual factors can effectively contribute to the prevention or resolution of conflict. So for example, in peace building, empowering people, influencing moral political climate, developing cooperation and humanitarian aid, peacemaking also, traditional diplomatic efforts, peacemaking between the countries, between the communities and all. But also it's those who are against this, they say, it is a source of conflict. And I think when I go back to the analyst, most analysts say that, majority of them, they say it's a conflict creating. And just like they give the examples of religious wars, sectorial violence, cultural violence, and even sometimes bystanders, they just don't want to do, okay, that's not our business. So doing all this, I'm here to speak on behalf of Hinduism. what my faith talks about this. I will go back to the Hinduism, the principle of Rita or Varnas. Because it's a 6,000 years, or sometimes we say 1500 to 500 BC, before there was a concept of casteism or Varna based on the responsibilities or moral values, which is in Hindu faith is known as the Dharma. And on the basis of that, the community was divided: priests, warriors, scholars, and all those four Varnas we have. And the main responsibility of the warriors was the art and practice of conflict resolution. So only one caste was allowed to resolve the conflict if there are conflicts. Then things change, as in history change, and then comes the period of Upanishad. That means 800 to 500 BC era. And the meaning of dharma, all of a sudden, in place of responsibility by your work, change by birth. And dharma, the word we said for the religion dharma, we use, and that becomes the meaning of law or your duty. And another concept also came, that's the oneness between self and the universe. So that was the time when we start talking about Atma or Paramatma. Atma means soul inside, and Paramatma the bigger soul or the last soul. So these are the concepts I'm giving, just giving the background of the bigger concepts to clarify why we think and how it happened. Then comes the concept of God in Hinduism. If you see Hinduism, most people see there is no single body of doctrine. Instead of there are different diverse beliefs and practices, and you can see different gods and goddesses. And I think it's the most in Hinduism you don't find anywhere else. And in this religion, we worship as many as gods we can. So it's not just like think one, we worship all. Because the last principle says, it is also adhered that there is only one God, but it has different forms. Just like we are human beings, but we have different bodies. But in the end, we are one. So we said Brahma. Brahma means the Paramatma or the go, which different religion says God. But to go to that level, we need gurus or different, and there are different doctrines that they're different form of gods. But in the end, we say the top is the Brahm or the final God. So from these principles, the principle universalism, it came into existence in Hinduism. And that was, we have the examples of Gita. In Gita, universalism in which all religion forms were seen as leading to the same divine truth. It is said by Lord Krishna. And also he said, all creations has been created from the same divine light and will end in finally there. So that's also said by him. And that's why when we say, we always refer the Gita and we say, Krishna showed the Virat Roop, means he showed that all different forms of gods, goddesses, different kind of creations you think about that this is the shape of the god or goddesses, is ultimately the one and one form. It will end, it's just like the different tributaries of rivers, but it will come into one. That's the sea. Same we have our holiest, because most people think the Gita is the holiest book, but for Hindu, Vedas are the actually ultimate holy books for us. And that was the authority for us. And the same thoughts came from the Veda also. That's the Yajurved 7.52. I'm giving that reference. Celestial twins create between us and the stranger a unity of hearts. May we unite in our minds, unite in our purpose, and not fight against the heavenly spirit within us. Let not the battle cry rise amid us, many slain, nor the arrows of the war or break a day. Also, principle of universalism in brief, because it's a huge and it's a detail, so it's hard to capture everything in one verse. So I try to capture as many as I can. The Hindu notion that what on the surface appear to be divided is at some higher level, essentially the one. It's the one. And that's why Gandhi gave the approach one of the mankind, that his thoughts were also derived from this, the notion of the Hinduism. We have different kind of beliefs that derive from different Vedas, and the major belief which unite all Hindus are the two. Those are the theory of karma and reincarnation. Why I am giving this information here? Because these are the fear psychosis we have, why we have to do better things in the world. Because karma says our actions or inactions and our intentions behind those actions are equal and opposite. If we do something wrong, maybe not in this life, in next life we will get back that wrong. If we do some good, it will come back to us. And same is the principle. Second theory was the reincarnation, that we believe soul or spirit after the death will again reborn. This is what we say in our beliefs. So I'm not sure which slide I am. Principle of ahimsa? Or yeah. Is it? No? Yeah. Okay. So also from those resources and beliefs comes the principle ahimsa, or the principle of non-violence, on which following non-violence, the principle Mahatma Gandhi said that people said that Mahatma Gandhi got India freedom, and even Martin Luther King Jr. he used this in his own demonstration, and it comes also from the Yajurveda. And also from the Gita. It says, ahimsa parmo dharma yato dharmastyo jay. It was really conflicting for me also in this verse, because most of the time we always say ahimsa parmo dharma. We don't speak after that. And when comes the conflict, then when I find out the full verse, I find out there is a direction for conflict also. It says, non-violence is the final approach. That's the moral value. It comes from comparison, critical tolerance, wisdom comes from the experience. But it further says that when we are, as a human being, we are not doing this to each other, but we also follow this for every soul in the planet. Means any animal or plant or everything, we should not be doing any violence against them. Because we believe in reincarnation, so maybe this life I'm a woman in this planet. In next life I can be a plant or I can be animal. That's the thought or mythology we have. And that's why if I'm doing ahimsa this life, it will come back to me. But when I go back to the ahimsa parmo yatho dharmasto jaya, this version also, the old version, it also gives that there is a chance for himsa also. Because in this verse, it says, ahimsa parmo dharma, no doubt, non-violence is the highest moral virtue. But for bringing law and order and bringing the peace in this, sometimes we use hinsa also, and that's justified. So that's why it also explains that hinsa, means or violence, can be justified if it is only three situations: self-defense, criminal justification, and in the situation of war. And that's how the main discussions come. The theory of just war, theories of reasonable defense, and theories of proportionate punishment. But all these has already been explained further, and that comes in the Arthashastra of the Hinduism. So it's not just like you can create war or go to the war, and then you say, okay, just because I'm doing this and war and I can do violence. No, there are situations, only those situations you can, otherwise you can't. And these all are explained there. And there are other Hindu sculptures which talk about how the stronger people or the people with strength, they should force. If they are in the royal field or they are the warriors community, how up to what extent they can do and what they cannot do. And that comes from other scriptures, which say superior being does not render evil for evil. If this is one should never harm the wicked or good or evil animal meriting death. Even we should not be meriting death. It's not an excuse. Under some circumstances, they have given example, certified example, that only those circumstances you may be stronger, you can use the force, otherwise you cannot use the force. And from all those scriptures, Mahatma Gandhi told at that time, an eye for an eye will make the whole world blind. If we follow this kind of things in the world, we will make everyone blind. So we should be following ahimsa, and we should also restricting the force who can have the power, how much power and how much force they can use, and that's only on your self-defense if you are facing war or there is a injustice, just wrong, something happens or somebody is breaking the law. Otherwise you can't do, and only one caste can do that. And other scriptures also talk about the conflict resolution directions. That comes also in the Yajurveda. It says social conflict is primarily based on analysis conflict at the level of inner self. So when we inner self, we have some conflict, then we become the internal obsession. All conflicts comes from our obsession. I want this, I want that, those kind of obsessions we have. Then it comes greed, and then other kind of aggression comes. So we should eliminate the causes of conflict and change our own behavior. So under those circumstances, we look internally also. So it's not only a political situation, but now I'm coming to our day-to-day situations. So they said, work on different things so you can create peace inside, and then you can send peace outside. And that should be under different situations. And they have given us the path also in those. And they give the path of karma. Karma means your actions or the duty. And another, increase knowledge, that's the path of gyan or the path of knowledge. So increase your knowledge, spread knowledge, attend knowledge. And if you are not able to do anything, or you are not able to resolve the conflict or the peace, you can't get peace, then go to the third path. That's the path of bhakti, yoga, or prayers. So that's it. And in the end, I just want to say, for everyday, day-to-day prayer and peace, they have given us the Shanti path. Shanti path means the prayer, what we do in everyday prayer. And everyone, after doing all their prayers, they will say this: may there be peace in the heavens, peace in our atmosphere, peace on the earth. Let there be coolness in the water, healing on the herbs, and peace radiating from the trees. Let there be harmony in the planets and in the stars, and perfection in internal knowledge. May everything in the universe be at peace. Let peace pervade everywhere at all. May I experience that peace within my own heart. So that's why I say Om Shanti, Om Shanti. So you might have heard about that. And that's why when we are talking about the peace, they have directions for internal peace, they have directions for the external peace, and preferences through the non-violence. But they have given the conflicting situation also, that there are situations you can go for conflict. So I think I haven't taken more time. I'm right in my time. So last time say, Om Shanti Ma Vishwa Ma Pahe. This is also coming from the Gita and from Yajurveda. That means peace upon whole world, by having peace inside and have that peace in the world. So create that. Thank you.
Just checking how that works. Good evening. So as was mentioned, I'm the Director of Liturgy for the Roman Catholic Diocese of Calgary, and I just wanted to take a moment to explain what a diocese is. A diocese is an administrative district. So think on your image, if you can see where Canada starts on your left, you'll see where the border is with the US, it's the fourth square in, I think. Anyhow, so the Diocese of Calgary extends north to Banff, south to the US border, and then east to the Saskatchewan border and west to the BC border. So that's this area of, someone's laughing, who's there? It's that one, no? Someone's writing with orange at home, yeah. So it's actually it's the third one in. There you go. So that's a diocese, so that's the area that I'm responsible for in some regards. So when I refer to a diocese, it's an area in which there are different parishes or churches, and the Catholic people who live in that area are the ones that we offer our ministry to. Now, my title is Director of Liturgy, so I thought I'd just take a moment to explain what liturgy is. Liturgy comes from a Greek word that means liturgia, which means a public work. And it's a public work in the sense of a benefaction, as if you were to put a fountain into a town square. And so you should see an image now which isn't actually a town square. What that is in front of Parliament buildings in Ottawa. It is a fountain, but it has these symbols of the different provinces and the flame. And so in that sense, it's a benefaction for the people of Canada. So it would have been paid for by taxpayer funds, and it's something given to the country, to the people. Liturgy is sometimes referred to also as a work of the people, as opposed to a public work, and that's also true. But recent scholarship would argue that a public work is more accurate historically. And I would say it's more accurate theologically, because we would view liturgy as something that we receive from God. Back in the 10th century, Prince Vladimir of Kiev, today in Ukraine, sent emissaries to Constantinople, which at that time was the capital of the Roman Empire and the center of Christianity. And he sent them to find a new religion for his people. So they went to a service called a Divine Liturgy at the Church of Hagia Sophia, and they reported back saying, "We knew not whether we were in heaven or on earth. For on earth there is no such splendor or beauty, and we are at a loss how to describe it. We only know that God dwells there among men, and their service is fairer than the ceremonies of other nations, for we cannot forget the beauty." So what you see there is a photograph of a Byzantine church. It's actually Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary Church in Renfrew. It's a Byzantine Ukrainian Catholic church. You can see it's very ornate with lots of paintings and things on it. The idea being that this church is giving people a glimpse of what it's like to be in heaven. Like, so when you gather together in the church, it's that place that helps people connect more with heaven. In the field of religious studies, we would talk about liturgy as a religious public ritual. And so this should be an image. Check. Yeah. Back in November, I was in Ottawa for Remembrance Day, and on Parliament Hill, there is a service, which is a religious service, interfaith service, and that's an example of a religious public ritual. In a practical sense, in my job, and this all comes down to peace in a minute and conflict, my job is to help our communities with their ritual expressions by giving them resources and doing education. I'm also responsible for preparing many of the different liturgies or public rituals that are for the whole diocese, so not just at one particular church. So if there's a major celebration at the cathedral where the bishop presides, these are often the ones that I'm responsible for organizing, or if another office is doing something, I'd be consulted for the ritual portions of these offices, of these services. Okay, so this was a service recently called the Rite of Election that happened at the cathedral, and the people who you see gathered behind where the bishop is standing were all coming to become Catholic at Easter. So that was one service where
the people were gathered and that I would organize. This was another one just about a week and a half ago, the chrism mass. And chrism is an oil with a fragrant balsam in it, and so it's used for different rituals. And this was our centennial celebration recently. The diocese was 100 years old. In 2012, we had a big celebration for that.
So the thing about being a liturgist is, well, they have a reputation, we have a reputation for being rather inflexible. And so I thought this topic was interesting, religion as a source of conflict or peace. So I thought, well, instead of speaking generally about peace in the Catholic tradition, I was going to talk more specifically about ritual and conflict and peace. So I have a story, and ironically, or interestingly enough, the story actually comes from the Jewish tradition, but it would apply just as well in my own. And I thought it was suitable given that we are at an interfaith gathering. So I'm just going to read this story. During a service at an old synagogue in Eastern Europe, when the Shema was said, half the congregants stood up and half remained standing, or remained sitting. The half that was seated started yelling at those standing to sit down, and the ones standing yelled at the ones sitting to stand up. The rabbi, learned as he was in the law and commentaries, didn't know what to do. His congregation suggested he consult a housebound 98-year-old man who was one of the founders of the shul. The rabbi hoped the elderly man would be able to tell him what the actual tradition was, so he went to the nursing home to visit the man, bringing along a representative from each faction of the congregation. Now, the one whose followers stood during the prayer said to the old man, "Is the tradition to stand during this prayer?" And the old man said, "No, that's not the tradition." The one whose followers sat said, "Good, then the tradition is to sit." And the old man answered, "No, that's not the tradition." So the rabbi said to the old man, "But the congregants, they fight all the time, yelling at each other about whether they should sit or stand." And the old man said, "That is the tradition." So this is also very much the case in Christianity with our ritual. People have strong ideas about the way things should be and what the tradition has been. Liturgy and the preparation of liturgy often involves quite a bit of conflict within the community. When I first started to work full-time in ministry, even though I had specifically studied liturgy, I wanted any position except working with liturgy for two reasons. One, I'm a very sensitive person and I don't like conflict. And I'm also very passionate about liturgy and ritual, so it pains me when it's not done well. But I don't think this is just a personality trait of liturgists. I would say ritual is often a source of conflict precisely because there's so much at stake for us in ritual as human beings. So I'd like you all just to think for a moment about some examples that you know in your own life of ritual. They could be religious rituals or not necessarily in religious rituals. And think about an example of a ritual that was unfamiliar and that might have alienated you or made you feel uncomfortable. And if you could maybe turn to somebody next to you and just share an example of some kind of a ritual that made you feel uncomfortable, unfamiliar. It may have been in your home, visiting somebody else, traveling to another country. So to think more broadly about rituals. So just take a moment and turn to your neighbor and see if you can share an example of that. A couple of people have one. No, I was waiting for you to share with the person next to you. It seems you're having trouble understanding, so I'll give you an example. I want you to think of a time when there was something you expected to happen. Maybe it was your birthday or somebody's birthday, and you would expect something to happen and it didn't happen. Or you were accustomed to a certain kind of gift or a certain kind of food and somebody didn't make it. Does anybody who's been discussing have an example that you could share? You guys were talking. You have one? Go ahead.
What do you want me to share?
Yeah, an example of a ritual that made you feel uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable or comfortable after that?
First, uncomfortable.
Yeah, okay. I am also Christian believer, and I born as Hindu and I studied Hinduism. Also, I married in a Sikh family, so my interested to know about Sikhism too. Then I came to Christianity, which adored me so much. It gave me so much peace of mind to know that there is a peace, because the more we develop our faith in God, our foundation, our bridges will be more stronger, so we will not have more fear. I used to have a lot of anxiety after my accident, which I would not discover that any wood can give me peace of mind. So I was praying a lot that God grant me a peace. How would I have a peace? Then I studied a lot about Bible, and then I came to conclusion there is a peace if we read the verses. So each day I would be sitting on my couch for maybe 3-4 hours and read the Bible and pick up one verses and apply on it. But I learned about that if we develop inner religion, no matter what foundation in our religion is, if we have a faith on it, no fear, no death, no sorrow can win us. The only thing is our belief that God has granted me that peace in His name. Amen.
Thank you. That's a very good example. I think that when you think of these different rituals, I'm going to think of one example. Like at times when people die in our families and we're really sad and distressed, we don't know what to do. But when we come together in our religious traditions, there are different prayers and customs and things like that that happen. And it's precisely these sorts of things that can comfort us. So I had an image there of a funeral. Another one, for instance, I know for me, one year I was not at home. I was living somewhere else, and my birthday came, and I was very uncomfortable because my mother every year bakes me a particular kind of cake. We're German, and my mother makes these wonderful German Torte, and that is a ritual that I am accustomed to. And if I don't have cake, it just doesn't quite feel like my birthday, because my mother hasn't made that symbol of a cake. Similarly, in our tradition, and you're all familiar with Christmas, there are certain songs that we expect to hear. And so this is a choir singing Christmas carols. And when I don't hear those, you're thinking, oh, it doesn't feel like Christmas. There are these different kinds of things. Yeah, so the ritual, for instance, can sometimes alienate us if it's not familiar, or people don't do what we expect. But at the same time, a ritual can be that one source of consolation, like at a time of distress. You read something that can really comfort you, or you go through these motions that are familiar. Now, although God is, in the Christian tradition, God is spirit, we as human beings are embodied, and so we have to use ritual practices, things that engage our bodies and our humanity, to mediate that journey of our soul to God. So you can think in your own tradition about some ritual practices that help you to make progress in the spiritual life. And I have just images of some examples, and I have to come out here because I didn't write them down. So this is a photo of a baptismal font. So it's a pool of water from a church in Montana. Oh. Okay. Oh, okay. Thank you. So this is a pond of water.
from the Catholic tradition, they're nuns, and they're wearing very distinctive clothing. Again, at our centennial celebration, we had First Nations people, and so they again, because they had very distinctive clothing. And other service. Here we see a laying of hands, one standing, one kneeling, to represent something. And here again, this is a man being ordained to the diaconate of a certain role, and he's placing his hands in the hands of the bishop as a symbol. You can see it's probably a symbol of obedience. This is another religious woman doing a full prostration to symbolize what she's doing. And they are again kneeling with arms outstretched, another external sign. Here you see people kneeling and people prostrating fully. And here they are washing one another's feet. That's another gesture of symbol. And then there's someone in silent individual prayer, and she's kneeling. So in addition to these movements, these gestures, and also the clothes that we might wear, we also have books or words that are familiar, or words that help connect us. So there's certainly the Holy Bible. There's sometimes music or something that's sung. And we heard some prayer this evening to open our session today. We also have ritual food. This was a Easter basket that I have made with traditional food. Somebody baking traditional bread. Ritual symbol again.
So the point here is that external practices, they actually form and condition and shape our internal dispositions, which affect how we behave in the world, whether we behave peacefully or with conflict. One example that I could think of was in recent studies on urban design and urban planning. It shows the way our streets are laid out, so where you can walk, where you can drive, what kind of businesses are around. These all affect the way we relate to one another. So I wanted to know, do any of you walk to work? You walk to work. Do any of you walk children to school? Some of you walk your children to school. Do any of you spend at least 45 minutes on Calgary Transit or on Deerfoot getting to work, or on the roads trying to get somewhere? Yeah. So I would venture to guess that those of you who are walking your children to school or walking to work, you might know your neighbors. You know what you're finding, in the neighborhood, what's going on. And those of you who spend all that time in traffic, you have less time with your family because you're spending 2 hours on the road commuting. So these external forms really affect our relationships in that way. In my neighborhood, they started weekend street parking to slow the traffic because there are lots of diners and they wanted more pedestrians to feel comfortable. In a similar way, rituals shape our internal spiritual progress and our relationship with God, with friends and family, with our community, and with the world. So, how do we use ritual? How do we use ritual and our religion to promote peace and not conflict? And I thought of 3 things I just wanted to bring up tonight. And the first is the connection between religion and everyday life. The first thing that came to mind for me when I learned of the topic of this conference was how often in families, children might not want to participate in the religion or in the religious practices of the family. Because our practices are steeped in history and tradition, but sometimes the connection between what we do religiously and everyday life in the modern world is lost or obscured for young people, and so they don't make sense to them. Young people are also engaged in a process of becoming adults, of finding their own identity, and religion can become a source of conflict. The parent might think the child is rejecting the values of the values that the religious practices symbolize, so it's painful for the parent who wants the best for the child. But then the child might not see the meaning of the rituals because they seem empty, and it can very easily become a power struggle with a lot of conflict. But if the two can speak about the values that lie behind the rituals, or that the rituals are trying to protect, there might be more agreement and more peace. It's also problematic if the religion is separated from everyday life. And it happens sometimes in Christian families that the family go to church on Sunday, but they don't bring the same ritual and tradition back into the family, into everyday life. Maybe they aren't praying together, having the ritual foods, the symbols, or discussing the message. And if parents did more to help children to see that connection, the relevance of their faith, there'd be more peace. So it's important not to lose sight of the meaning, the values of religious practices, that these are not ends in themselves, but means to a more spiritual life. The second thing I want to talk about was the use of ritual, and that rituals can foster peace when they're used for healing, reconciliation, inclusion, recognition, and solidarity. And this can happen within a community, across religions, and publicly too. In the Catholic religion, what we call the sacraments, which are our primary rituals, they're all oriented towards peace, forgiveness, reconciliation, healing, and towards bringing people together into unity. But there can be challenges to this, and we talked about how some rituals can console or alienate. One example I think of is exclusive language. That is, we might say mankind rather than humankind. And in some cases, people will feel, well, we have the word humankind. If you say mankind, you're excluding women. And there can be a conflict that arises over that. But it's usually unintentional. There are different roles in our faith for men and women, and sometimes there's conflict if the women feel excluded, and that they often would argue, like in the case of language, that this using exclusive language has nothing to do with the religion, but it's just old-fashioned language. So we don't need it anymore. But others are attached to this language of tradition, and there's that conflict. I just saw in the news the other day that something similar is going on in the Mormon tradition, where some of the women are asking to be part of things in a way they historically haven't been. Oh, how much time do I have? Okay, I'll move quickly. I'm actually almost done, So I just want to say also that through human weakness, rituals can create conflict when they're used to demonstrate power, to show power of one person or another, to exclude or to control. So we just need to be aware of the power of ritual and to examine our motives when we're organizing rituals in our families and communities. And then lastly, the question is, what does my personal religion have to do with world peace, for example? I've been focusing more on the domestic sphere, personal lives and our religious communities, but we also move out from these to try to promote peace in the world. And sometimes if you think about the question of world peace and you might neglect to look at what is right in front of us or in our own hearts. People might come together with the intention of working for peace and justice, but then there's conflict within an organization. And if you look deeper, that conflict could actually be in the family, or even deeper if individuals aren't taking time to practice their own faiths in a personal way. And just one example, I had 3 committees in my work. When I came on, there was lots of conflict. They were fighting a lot. And I thought, well, instead of beginning with a very quick prayer as they had been doing, we take about 20 minutes in time for prayer together to set the right disposition. And then we move forward. And just taking that time to actually practice what we believe and not just focus on the work of the committee changed the whole mentality, and it became much more peaceful. So really, peace and conflict are never outside of us or too large for us to engage with, and it's easy to become discouraged. But when we act with peace at home, our children learn that way of behaving, they take it to their schools, to their friends, and then into the world as adults. And when we're peaceful within our own religious community, we show peace to the world. And when we come together, like we are today, representatives of different religions wanting peace, then we live peace, and peace continues to beget peace. So the more authentically we practice peace in our own religious traditions, the more peace we can bring to the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. I wanted to address your story about the Shema a little bit, just because it made me think of a story and how we sometimes deal with conflict on a household basis. My tradition, coming from a Western European Jewish background, where my family lived in Italy and Germany, we have a tradition of sitting and closing our eyes when we recite the Shema, this prayer in that story. And my boyfriend comes from a Middle Eastern Jewish tradition from Turkey and Lebanon, and his tradition is to stand up when saying the Shema, eyes wide open. And so the first times that we were praying together, I would always stand up to say the Shema because I assumed that's what he'd be most comfortable with. And he would always sit down and close his eyes when reciting the Shema because he assumed that's what I'd be most comfortable with. And it took us about 3 or 4 months to realize that we were doing this. We were doing the opposite of our own traditions to try and do this anticipatory compromise. So that's how we create peace at home. So starting with the Jewish tradition, I do want to talk about the essentialness of peace as a value in the Jewish tradition. And so religious Jews usually pray 3 times a day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon, and once in the evening. And the most important part of that, of those prayers, is something called the Amidah, and that's the personal, quiet, to yourself prayer. It takes about 10 minutes to go through all of it, directly between you and, God on high. And you always close it with these words: Ose shalom bimromav, huya se shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru amen. May the one who makes peace in the high places make peace over us and over all of the nation, and let us say amen. It is the most critical part and the most essential part of what we pray 3 times a day, that we're always fixated on the goal of peace. And peace in Hebrew is shalom, and what does that mean? And shalom, really, when we think of peace and we want to try and get that English notion of what that means, is it comes from a root that refers to wholeness, to completeness, and to totality. So if we were trying to give shalom a sound, it would be more like 1,000 voices singing in harmony at one time than quiet. It's something that's bringing a lot of disparate elements together as one, and in the same manner that God is one. And so that's shalom, and that's how it fits in within the Jewish tradition. And it's so essential that when we talk about the Torah, which is a word that can either mean the first 5 books of Moses, or it can mean all of Jewish law and all of what it means to live as a Jewish person, we really, when we're trying to boil that down to its fundamental elements, are always saying that it's all about peace. So in Proverbs, we say her ways, meaning the Torah's ways, are pleasant ways, and all her paths are peace. The Talmud explains that the entire Torah is for the sake of the ways of peace, of shalom. And Maimonides, who was one of our great sages in the medieval period, says that great is peace, as the whole Torah was given in order to promote peace in the world, as it is stated that the ways of the Torah are pleasant and all her paths are peace. And shalom, peace, is so essential that it is one of the names that is given to God. And so peace in and of itself is sort of the presence of God among us. So how does this relate in terms of how we interact with each other on a daily basis? And how can we abstract that out in terms of how are we to interact between nations, between peoples, between ethnicities and identities? So starting on the individual level, the Talmud teaches us that the most critical thing is to be, if you're going to be one of the other, be of the persecuted rather than the persecutor. That it's better to suffer as a result of persecution than to persecute one another. And what this basically boils down to is that there is an understanding that all human beings are created in the image of God, and what one does to harm another human being, one does to God himself. So the rabbis elaborated on this point and said that when one destroys a single individual, it is as if that person has destroyed the whole world. And extracting from that as well, they also said that if one person ventures to save the life of another individual, it is as if they have saved the entire world. So the love of peace and this pursuit of peace and the preservation of life are essential Jewish values. That said, that because preservation of life is so critical, there are cases where a violent response or a violent reaction to something can be justified, but it's very minimal. So defense, including self-defense in the event that a life is in danger, is not just something that's permitted, it's actually an obligation. So to explain what that means, it's essentially that if someone's life was threatened before you and there was absolutely no other means to stop that from happening, then it would be permissible to take a life if it meant saving a life. That said, so when the rabbis were trying to understand this coming out of Torah, that if someone comes to kill you, kill him first, what does that mean? That the rabbis said, well, what if you had the ability to just stop an assailant somehow without killing them by removing a limb or knocking them over or doing something that would injure the person but without taking a life? And they ruled from that if it was at all remotely possible to stop the assailant without killing them, then the person who stopped the assailant would be considered a murderer. So you have to actually, violence is only justifiable and taking a life is only justifiable when there is no other recourse, and that must be established. So, and also when it comes to saving a life, that is the principle that's highest in Jewish law. It's one of the things for which you can break almost any other commandment. So on Shabbat, so on the seventh day, it's a day of rest for us. We have a series of things that we're unable to do on Shabbat. One of them includes carrying something in a public place. Now, if you saw a starving person out on your street, by carrying food to them, you could save their life, then you're not just allowed to break Shabbat for that, to break the Sabbath. You must absolutely save a life in all circumstances. So from these principles, the rabbis developed what they felt were the ethics and principles of war. And there's a lot of struggle in the Talmud and in the history of Jewish thought to deal with the fact that when we look at what you might call the Old Testament, or if you look at the Tanakh, which is what we say is the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, then there is a lot of conflict within the Torah. There is a lot of warfare. There's a lot of sometimes glorification of violence in it. And trying to deal with that while also grappling with the fact that that is an element of history, but not how a Jewish life should be lived, is something people considered a lot. And so when we look at some things that happen in the Torah, we look at Joshua, for instance, who is documented as having many wars of conquest. And in it, in Joshua, he sends 3 letters to the inhabitants of an area he wants to conquer. The first one says that those who wish to flee should flee. The second one said that those who wish to make peace should make peace. And the third letter said that those who want to make war should prepare for war. Now, this was used to illustrate that any enemy must be given the option to make peace or flee in any circumstances where war is being conducted. Jewish law also requires that when besieging a city in order to seize it, it must not be surrounded on all 4 sides, but only on 3 sides, thus leaving a path of escape for whomever wishes to flee to save his own life. There's also very strict rules derived from Torah about protecting the environment when one is at war. You're not allowed to cut down fruit-bearing trees. And coming from all of that, when you're at war, you cannot damage the land. The land must still be able to provide life and sustain life. And that's a really key element of understanding the Jewish perspective on the ethics of warfare. There are wars that are commanded in Torah against the Canaanites and the Amalekites and so on, the 7 nations. By the end of the 1st century, the rabbis had decreed that these nations no longer existed for all intents and legal purposes, so no wars are insisted upon by Torah. There are no obligatory wars. Also, another type of war that we see in the Tanakh are wars of expansion, wars to try and grow territory, to control more resources. These have also been made forbidden effectively by present Jewish law because it requires the consent of a Jewish court, national court called the Sanhedrin. We haven't had one since the 4th century, realistically. It also requires the consent of the high priest, and we haven't had a high priest for 2,000 years since the temple was destroyed. So there is no one who can consent to this kind of war. So what that leaves is the only just war from a Jewish perspective is a defensive war, when it is the only alternative in terms of saving a life, just like we talk about the right to self-defend or defend someone else to save a life between individuals. It's important to note that by the time the Talmud was compiled, the Jews had lost political independence, and so rabbinic discussion of war really lacks any sort of firm context of what it means to be a political entity. And that's fairly true of Jewish law in general. So we're dealing principally with what concerns relations between individuals more than between nations. But they derived some principles of what a just war would look like and what would necessitate it. So every attempt should be made to settle international disputes by negotiation, not by war or by threat of war. We must seek peace first and always. This must always be an option. It must always remain an option if a war is justifiable. The only legitimate wars are defensive when there is a threat that can only demonstrably be eliminated through warfare. This would also apply to protecting a nation or people who are under a threat that can only be eliminated through warfare. So there is some argument that if a genocide is taking place, then Jewish law does mandate that one becomes involved, for whatever that means. And territorial or religious expansion does not justify war, and these types of wars are no longer possible under Jewish law. Minimal casualties, it kind of goes without saying, but non-combatants should also be spared, and people must always, within the context of any war, have the freedom and autonomy to flee. And also derived from that is that the environment cannot be harmed. There's no sort of scorched earth justified warfare, that the environment must be preserved, the land must still be able to sustain and give life. And that brings us to essentially the hope of the Messianic age, which is sort of the principle of Judaism and Jewish thought now, is that we're yearning for this Messianic age of peace. And what does that look like? Well, the prophets like Yeshayahu, some might know as Isaiah, gave some pretty beautiful words on it that I'll just relate to close off. And they shall beat their plows into plowshares, or beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks, and nation shall not lift sword against nation, and neither shall they learn war anymore. So may we all find that peace. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you all. I just wanted to make a quick note that I'm thanking God that I actually didn't write my speech on jihad or war, because it would have sounded just like Mariam's speech, almost identical. So I will begin my own speech, and it's Bismillah, and I will start with the Quranic text that we always start with the name of God. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah, the Gracious, the Merciful. Throughout history, numerous religions have shaped our understanding of the world and have changed the course of civilizations. They have spurred movements and have led to the growth of nations, but also been the subject of conflict between people. Religion has a potent ability to keep order and peace, but it also has been used dishonestly as a cause for some of the greatest conflicts. In this speech, I will take the broad position that religion, when used effectively, is a source of peace rather than conflict. I will endeavor to briefly explain the role of religion, the source of conflict, and the requirements of the triumph of peace. For the purposes of this speech, I will speak only about Islam and our religion's continuous leadership and commitment to achieving peace in the world. Islam is a spiritual source of stability. It is a valuable set of beliefs in relation to mankind.
and with the existence of our Creator, Allah. The Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, was a messenger of Allah who received divine revelations and guidance from Allah. And the guidance from Allah and the revelations and the guidance are compiled within the Holy Quran. He was perfect in character, who embodied the teachings of Islam and led his life in an exemplary manner, peace being the benchmark of all of his endeavors. Henceforth, the life of the Holy Prophet, and peace be upon him, coupled with the Holy Quran, the word of Allah, provides followers of Islam with a reality-based framework of guidelines for their welfare. And these believers, in turn, benefit greater society through the good works and effective implementation of the guidelines set forth in Islam. The Arabic word Islam literally means peace. All of its teachings impart knowledge on inner and outward peace, and a Muslim is considered a practitioner of peace, as exemplified by the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. Islam is also a universal religion. This means that all who accept Islam accept the fundamental messages brought by all the prophets of God, from Hazrat Adam, Abraham, Krishna, Buddha, Moses, Jesus, to the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon them all. The principal message being to worship God and to love and show compassion for mankind. The inclusiveness of all of these teachings, which are unified under Islam or in Islam, illustrate the true acceptance of all peoples. In order to be peaceful, acceptance of everyone is essential. In fact, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community exemplifies this belief in our motto, love for all, hatred for none. As Muslims, we believe that faith is necessary for our spiritual and physical progress, and we should devote our entire life to wholeheartedly comprehend Islam. In doing so, Islamic teachings should be ubiquitous in a Muslim's life in order to achieve inward peace and to create outward peace. Islam is absolute in its message. It transcends time, and it does not require evolution, unlike cultures do. Cultures are like an organism. They adapt, change, evolving to sometimes for the betterment of its people, sometimes for the worse. Excessive consumerism, sexism, apartheid, and female genital mutilation are such damaging cultural evolutions that were and are still unfortunately culturally accepted. That is why religion became and still is a necessity to keep true to the rights and freedoms of all of mankind, or humankind. Religions do not breed conflict. People who are inclined towards the creation of anarchy can fashion anything as a means to achieve what they covet. Whether it's the color of our skin, the name of our tribes, our nationalities, ideologies, even religion. Conflicts occur when injustice and greed are prevalent. If you omit these two evils, it becomes very difficult to maintain any form of conflict. There is an insatiable appetite for more money, control, and ultimate power. I urge you to look at all the places in the world where natural resources are considerable, such as oil, gas, metals, minerals, crops. That is where conflicts befall predominantly. I know this is a sweeping generalization, but it is often true, and this phenomenon is known as a resource curse. We only have to look in our own backyard to see the damaging effects of the resource curse. Only recently, the UN declared Canada as a nation had committed genocide against its Aboriginal people. I believe religion can serve as an instrument of resolution for the attainment of peace. It teaches us not to worship money and to achieve modesty and meeting our two duties to humanity and to our spirituality. In cultural anthropology, and I'm sure Miriam would appreciate this, in cultural anthropology, there is a concept of us and them identity, that people define themselves by which group they belong to. A person's identity can be singular, but more often than not, it is multifaceted. For example, I identify with being an Ahmadiyya Muslim, a person who has deep faith in Allah and a devout follower of Islam. However, being a mother and a British, Pakistani, Canadian, and as a woman are also part of my identity. Being part of a group or groups is a key part of our identity, naturally initiating an us and them thinking. It has been studied by anthropologist Dr. David Mayberry Lewis, but that when a group's identity is under threat, they will defend their group ruthlessly, especially if their identities are principally based on religion. Governments and multinational companies, one and the same thing, exploit this thinking of us and them identity under the guise of freedom from oppression from them or the other. Governments and multinational companies create these conflicts as a sideshow while seizing ownership over the resources or over entire countries. How can we blame religion as a source of conflict if the person or the peoples are not conforming to its ideologies, instead manipulating it for their own gain? Let me explain. A car is a mode of transport. It is used to make lives easier and comfortable. It can be a lifeline for someone who is suffering a heart attack, who can quickly be transported to the hospital and receive life-saving treatment. On the other hand, it can be used as an agent of destruction. For someone who decides to drink and drive, they can kill someone, thus devastating lives. You can elevate this metaphor on a global level and relate this to religion, where individuals, groups, or nations have wrongfully used religion as a vehicle to fuel their conflicts and create carnage, or positively used religion as a vehicle to establish amity and reconciliation. Lastly, I would like to talk about peace. Peace can be achieved in a myriad of ways in Islam, but there are two particular concepts that I would like to draw your attention to. One is the concept of ridding of oneself of ego, and the other is balance, moderation. The promised Messiah, peace be upon him, the founder of the Ahmadiyya movement in Islam, has spoken of 3 stages of human progress in his book, The Philosophy of the Teachings of Islam. He advises that one of the first things one must do spiritually to enrich oneself is rid oneself of ego. The ego is a petri dish for evil to reproduce. The 7 deadly sins, greed, gluttony, lust, sloth, wrath, envy, pride, are wrapped up in ego. They are the necessary evil to create conflict. The second concept is moderation or balance. If one overeats, they suffer consequences. If one eats too little, they suffer from malnutrition. Excess is harmful. Even overloving your children or neglecting them leads to unstable and unhealthy relationships and negative behavioral consequences. This consumerist culture that has made entire societies into slaves. This consumerist culture that has made entire societies slave to materialistic goods has had a monumental effect on our environment and the world. That is why it is imperative to adopt this concept of balance. When everything is in balance, one is able to reach an equilibrium, which in essence is peace. Ahmadiyya Muslims live all over the world and are from different walks of life, backgrounds and ethnicities. We strive to inculcate these teachings of Islam into our daily life. We are attempting to utilize religion to accomplish peace. Our global leader of the Ahmadiyya movement in Islam, Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad, delivered a keynote speech at the World Religions Conference held in Guildhall, London, England. He highlighted that all major religions of the world taught the worship of God and love and compassion for mankind, and in their original form. And if these original teachings were held today, it would lead to a harmonious society, free from conflict and war. In closing, I will echo the same sentiment. In accommodating and encouraging each other to be true to our own faith, whilst demonstrating compassion and understanding that we all came from the same Creator and we will all go back to Him. Let us unshackle ourselves from the sources of conflict and have the courage to orchestrate peace. I would like to convey my sincere appreciation to the organizers, to the volunteers, to our guests and our sisters. So thank you so much. Jazakallah.
Thank you very much for allowing me to read my comment to all of you. I came to Canada in 1987 from Germany. I only wanted to stay 1 year, but the reason why I wanted to stay so badly in this amazing country is an evening like this one tonight. Promoting and speaking of peace while talking about our different religions and realizing how much we have in common is wonderful. Christians, Jews, Hindus, and Muslims talking about each other's religions in a mosque, how great is that? I don't think I would have experienced this in Germany, because Germany has still issues about, if I don't look like a German, I'm not a German. I didn't grow up like this in my family, because my parents taught me tolerance and love towards everybody who comes into my life. Thank you.
On behalf of the Ahmadiyya Women's Association, we would like to thank our wonderful speakers for the night, especially to Susan Rutherford for being with us tonight and making this event successful. Thank you. We would also like to thank our guest speakers tonight, Ms. Lalitha Singh, Dr. Simone Rosig, Ms. Mariam Fry, and Ms. Sarah Chowdhury, for taking time out to be here with us tonight and offering such informative and wonderful perspectives on tonight's topic. May Allah bless your efforts. Thank you to our guest listeners and newcomers to our mosque for the first time. We are honored to have you here with us, and we hope you enjoy tonight's symposium. At this time, I would like to invite the President of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Women's Association in Calgary, Ms. Amtal Qayyum, to say some final words and lead us in silent prayer.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of Allah, the gracious, ever merciful. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Peace be on all of you. Peace and blessings of Allah be upon you. I want to say thank you to all of my guests who came here and spent their time with us. And we got this opportunity to listen to you, and I hope that all of you would have learned something new from each other's faith. And the purpose of this type of gatherings is to celebrate peace and religious tolerance, because these are the basic values of our religion, Islam. We as Muslims have been instructed to spread the message of love, peace, and religious tolerance. And these type of gatherings give us the opportunity to sit together, to talk, to speak about our religion, and to spread the message of peace and religious tolerance. I want to say thank you again to all the speakers and all our guests, and also our organizers who provided us this opportunity. Thank you very much. And now I will deliver some gifts for the guests, and after that we will join in silent.